Hello there, digital world. Welcome back once again to another episode of Spliced in Later. It's movie review time. First in a few weekly installments of movie reviews, because I guess the summer blockbuster season has arrived for movies in America. Here in Australia, it's winter blockbusters, which is, as I've said before, cold but exciting. We're going to get right into it today because it's late here, in having just come back from watching this movie and got work tomorrow. We are reviewing Fast 10 or Fast X, however you want to pronounce it, the 10th mainline film in the Fast and Furious franchise, 11 overall if you count the offshoot Hobbs and Shaw. Now, I believe during my time on this podcast, have started this, I have reviewed F9, Fast 9, Fast and Furious 9. God, the titles get a bit crazy there. And I believe I mentioned Hobbs and Shaw in my top 10 movies of 2019. I didn't review it, but I did do my top 10. And I believe if it did not make the list, it definitely got an honorable mention. Bit of cards on the table before we get into the review here. I love this franchise, and I will defend my love for it until the day I die. And I think a lot of people will agree with me on that because the box office reflects it here. The Fast and Furious franchise is a unique little gem that has defied expectations to become what it is, and then does not hide or deny what it is, what appeals to people. Basically, the very first Fast and the Furious movie, if you don't know, came out in 2001. That's over 20 years ago. And that movie was basically Point Break with cars. It was just an undercover FBI agent trying to infiltrate a heist crew, driving fast cars, and loose women, all of that early 2000s shtick. And then the franchise sort of fumbled around a bit there, trying to make sequels to that, but never really straying that far from that theme of drag racing and not the seedy underbelly, but that sort of world. And then towards the end of the 2000s, it sort of touched on it with Fast and Furious in 2009, where after playing around with a lot of different characters and storylines, the people behind the Fast and Furious franchise knew that its main draw was its two leads. Vin Diesel as Dominic Toretto, the unstoppable heist man who lives his life a quarter mile at a time, and Paul Walker as Brian O'Connor, the FBI agent that was sent in to dismantle the heist crew, ended up becoming an essential part of it, and a family man, having fallen for Dom's sister Mia. But by Fast 5, which came out in 2011, which is still 10 years ago, the franchise found its shtick, its main drive, which pulled away from illegal drag racing and fast cars solely, and became big, bombastic, action-style movies that went from big, gigantic heists to end-of-the-world, show-stopping, taking out terrorists and supervillains, driving along endless runways or chasing submarines in Antarctica, or even launching into space. Absurd, but the franchise knows it and it embraces it. And the public embraces that absurdity. Because there's something about film which all those reviewers out there who sit on their high horses and look down on these movies, or should I say even those directors who always take little jabs at the Fast and Furious franchise in their movies, and the fans that like those movies. Film is not one specific thing. It is not this pristine art form where it should only be classy, think type movies where it moves you emotionally, or it makes you think, or it tackles tougher objects and opinions and all of that stuff. Film is subjective, like art itself. Two paintings. One is of the Mona Lisa, one is of Mr. Squiggle. And your appreciation of art is subjective out of those things which appeals to you. And no answer is wrong in that regard. If you think Mr. Squiggle painting is better than the Mona Lisa, that's subjective because it's your opinion. And that's what these movies are. They are silly. They are absurd. They are ridiculous. They're cheesy. They're corny. But they are also fun to watch. And for people that like that stuff, there's nothing wrong with that. And the box office alone shows that. What really frustrates me is when these type of movies are successful, and it's not just Fast and Furious, it's the Marvel superhero films or the animated films that everybody likes from Ice Age or the Minions. That sort of belief that this is subpar cinema that's taking away from the artsy-fartsy films that deserve their time in the spotlight. It is frustrating if those type of movies are pushed aside for the big blockbuster stuff, but that should never take away that stuff is appealing and engaging and entertaining. And at the end of the day, sometimes we just want to sit down and just watch a movie that will put a big smile on its face, on our face. And love it or hate it, the Fast and Furious franchise absolutely succeeds in that regard. It has taken a core group of solid characters that have become a family, where it's Dom and Brian, or you've got Michelle Rodriguez, Letty, Tyrese Gibson's Roman, Ludacrous's Tej, you got Sung Kang's Han, Natalie Emanuel's Ramsey, and then you bring in all these other big action stars now, whether it's Dwayne Johnson, Jason Statham, John Cena, Jason Momoa now, and then you've even got Charlize Theron and Helen Mirren. They all give 110% into this stuff, and it shows, and it's engaging, and it pulls you in. And as the movies get more and more sillier, there's also a sense that things are building towards an eventual conclusion. Who knows when that conclusion will be, but with this film, Fast 10, being a part 1 film, it does feel like we're about to get there. Everything that ever has been established in all these other movies, all the characters, all their arcs, all the baggage that's come with all the things they've done in previous films, it's all coming to a head. Characters are heading for the finish line. And what, as a result of that, makes for a very entertaining movie. It's not the best Fast and Furious movie in any sense. The absurdity is getting out of control. And sometimes you do think that it's getting a bit too much. But then you just sort of roll with it, and you realize how much fun you're having watching the film. And that's what sums up Fast 10 in a nutshell. It's absurd, it's ludicrous, it's silly, but it is fun. Especially with Jason Momoa in this film, which we're about to jump into right now. If you want to know the basic plot of Fast 10, pretty simply, the movie starts out with Dom and friends pretty much living the dream. They've got a very peaceful moment in their family lives. No one's going after them at this point in time. But then suddenly, oh yes, they are, because Jason Momoa is in town. He plays Dante Reyes, who is the son that we never knew existed, of Hernan Reyes, who was the bad guy in the 5th one. I believe he was like a mafia mobster who sort of owned Rio. And that was the one they first met Luke Hobbs in that film as well, but they basically stole all his money and then dropped a safe on him. Murdered him. Apparently during that time, Jason Momoa was there. We didn't know it at the time. He survived the ordeal, and now he's out for revenge. 10 years later, he's launching a all-out war against Dominic Toretto and his entire family. Anyone he's ever worked with, is associated with, anyone he's ever dared to call family and invite to one of his legendary barbecues to gather around the family table, he's going after them. He's going to take them all down. It's very Avengers Infinity War style, where everybody splinters off into their own desperate struggle to survive. For first and foremost, though, this is the Vin Diesel movie, Vin Diesel versus Jason Momoa. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of characters. Some characters do not get the spotlight as much as others. But this is also a part 1 film, so it's hard to review it as its own film when you know that you haven't got the full story yet, and you don't know how the 2 films are going to complement each other. Even 3, if this ends up being like a 3-part movie, which I kind of hope it doesn't, but you never know. You cannot say for certain. What works for this movie 100% is Jason Momoa as Dante. I would describe him, and I think a lot of people are describing him, as like the Fast and Furious Joker. He is maniacal in his pursuit of Dom and Co. And he's gleeful. He is constantly laughing. He's constantly wild carding whether he's going to hug you or kill you. He's always thinking 10 steps ahead of everybody else, even though it also seems like he doesn't have a clue half the time. When things goes wrong, he laughs it off. When things go right, he laughs it off. He's very threatening with his knives and his bombs and his explosions. He's got this basic mindset, is that killing Dom and friends would be too easy. He's got to make them suffer. And this whole movie is just his relentless pursuit to make them suffer. And he is an absolute joy to watch. He's so much fun. Every scene that he is in, you cannot help but be entertained by. It's difficult because he is full on the most villainous villain that's ever been in the Fast and Furious franchise. He doesn't have an ulterior motive where he's targeting Dom, but he also wants to get rich, or he's trying to steal some device which he can sell to terrorists. It is pure, unhabilitated mayhem that he's after, designed to tear down Dom's world. He doesn't care who gets in his way to get it done. He'll blow up entire cities. He'll kill innocent people who have nothing to do with what's going on. He'll take down entire governments, agencies, if he has to, and he'll just laugh about it and monologue and wear these fancy outfits. He's got a very flamboyant style, which is just fantastic. I loved him in this, and I can't wait to see where this character goes with the part 2 stuff coming on later on down the track. Also, the fast cars are here, and they're great as always. The stunts are ludicrous, insane. You would think after the last film where they launched into space that they'd gone as far as they could. But the stunts that are done here, the things that happen, are absolutely bonkers. But at this point, when you're 10 films into this franchise, you cannot sit there and go, that's silly, that's too silly for me. At this point, you just got to be like, cool, great, what's going to happen next? Some other wrinkles in here are that the agency, which has sort of been like the government funding for Dom and his crew to do what they need to do, sort of the government, but not. There's a shift in the balance of power in that regard, and instead of being an ally to the team, they're a hindrance, they're an enemy. And that's also embracing the absurdity for that, because the agency is like this futuristic Black Ops site where they've got giant rooms with televisions just hovering in nothingness, and cells with rotating walls. And even then, you just roll with it, which is interesting and fun, and had a great time with it too. Vin Diesel is actually quite good in this one. I thought with Fast 9, he seemed asleep at the wheel. I thought maybe he was getting a bit tired or phoning in these performances. But his performance in this one, I think because the vendetta that he's facing is so personal, and so many people close to Dominic Toretto are suffering as a result of what's happening to him, and his son is involved this time around, which is pretty dangerous as well. He really sells it a lot, and because he's in like 90% of this film, he's really carrying it a lot. I thought that was great. I also like there's a little side story going on with John Cena's Jacob Toretto, who comes back and is sort of playing daycare, looking after Dom's son. Now, I don't really remember what happened with Jacob Toretto in the last film. One slight drawback with the movies, and it's not necessarily the movie's fault, but there have been so many movies, and so many big things have happened, and so many big characters have been involved in certain movies, but not consistently in all the movies, that you do have to stop and think. You're like, the thing that they're talking about, what movie did that happen in? And what was the result of that? With Jacob Toretto, I had to think, because I can't really remember how evil he was in the last movie, or if he was just misunderstood, and how that resolved. Because this movie sort of picks up like he's part of the family and he hangs out with everybody all the time, but then sometimes it implies that it doesn't, and he's still a lone wolf. And I couldn't recall. John Cena's having fun, and John Cena is awesome to watch as always. I love his little repertoire with Dom's kid. But I had to think, where are we at with this character? That said, he brings a lot of the comedy, a lot of great action scenes in here as well, and I think he's a great part of this franchise and this cast. Downsides for the film are two big things. One is that there are so many characters and there's so much going on that it feels like a lot of them get sidetracked or pushed aside for the Jason Momoa movie, which is honestly fine with me in a large sense because he's so great. But I mean, you get Michelle Rodriguez and Charlize Theron are putting their own little side quests, which is interesting and okay, but it unfolds in slow chunks and it sort of detracts from the pacing of the rest of the movie. And then you have the rest of Dom's crew, which is Roman, Tej, Han, and Ramsey. They drift aimlessly through this movie. They're part of the first big action set piece at the start of the film, but then once that's over, the movie doesn't really know what to do with them. So they sort of float around in the orbit of what's going on in the film, but never really directly engaged, and they never really sync up to the main plot by the end of the film. They have some interesting stories going on, but it was never particularly felt like it had a purpose. There is one scene involving these characters where they actually seek help from Pete Davidson, of all people, but the result of that scene is sort of a failure. It does not go the way they want. And then you sit back and you go, okay, so they walked into that room, they spoke to Pete Davidson, they didn't get what they wanted from him, and then they walked out. It's like, that. What exactly was that? It was kind of like they were struggling to know what to do with him. As I said, this is a part 1 movie, so I don't know what the plan is going in for the next part. Maybe they have a bigger role, and it's that dreaded curse of a part 1, part 2 movie, where characters have bigger roles in certain parts, but not necessarily the whole thing. And when you don't have the whole picture, it sort of hinders your ability to appreciate that at that point in time. Strictly speaking as well, Jason Statham, if you're coming to this movie for more Deckard Shaw action, restrain your hopes, because he is only in a couple of scenes, and a lot of his scenes have already been shown in the trailer. Which is another drawback for the movie so far, is that this is very, very a part 1 movie. There are some part 1, part 2 movies which work effectively well because they always manage to sort of wrap up whatever they're doing in the first part and leave you with anticipation and a cliffhanger for the next bit. I'm not exactly sure which movies have done this successfully. I guess Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 1 kind of does that, where it reaches a natural point in the story that they're telling that it's good to take a break and pause and then come back for the second one. Or you have infamous The Desolation of Smaug, where they just tell the story up until a point and then they just stop. And you go, whoa, okay. I guess that's the end of part 1. It's taking how cliffhangers work in TV shows and applying them to movies. But when you've sat in a movie for over 2 hours, you do kind of want a sense of resolution to what you just want, instead of having the rug pulled out from under you and it's like, oh, I want the rest of the story. I'm going to have to wait and remember what happened in this first part 2 years later when I see the second part, which can be frustrating. And unfortunately, this movie falls into that regard. Everything's moving along, it's exciting, it's action-packed, things are building to a giant climax, but instead of resolving that climax, they just cut it and they go, whoop, this big thing's about to happen, credits roll. And you're like, what? So at the moment, that detracts me from the movie. When part 2 comes out and I can look at this whole thing as one big story, it might not be so bad. But strictly from a release standpoint, that frustrates me, and I think it's going to frustrate a lot of people. I can't say too much more about the movie because there's a lot of twists and turns. There's actually some really good twists in here, which I like, involving character allegiances and characters that come back or are alluded to. Some excitedly so. Some characters come back that you're like, yes, I'm really excited to see them again. It's been too long. And others where you're like, how are they back? That's confusing. I don't know what to make of that just yet. If you are a fan of this franchise, I think you'd be hard-pressed to not enjoy this one. You might laugh. I think it's the funniest movie, and not by design. I don't think it's intentionally supposed to be this funny, but I think because of the script and the audacity of some of these scenes, it does make you laugh, but in a good way, in a fun way. And if you've been following this franchise and you love this franchise and you love all the characters and you love all the movies and all the different things that happen in each movie, it sort of thanks you for sticking with the franchise for so long and pays things off and references things, pulls things back that you may have been waiting for an answer for, rewards you for holding on to specific characters for so long. I think it is very well crafted in its design to be the franchise closer, and I hope that they stick with it and they don't go, oh well, we'll just keep making more, because why not? If the ultimate goal here is this epic 2-part final story for the Fast and Furious franchise, so far I'm pretty pleased with what they delivered. They're silly, they're bombastic, they're stupid. There's a great line in here from Alan Ritchson, who plays Ames, the new leader of the agency or whatever. He's talking to Brie Larson. He's essentially telling her about the other Fast and Furious movies. If for some reason you're watching Fast 10 and you haven't before and you need that recap. But there's a great line where he says, I'm sort of paraphrasing here, but he's like, if it's doable in a car, they've done it. If it defies the laws of God and gravity, they've done it twice. And if that doesn't sum up how weirdly insane this franchise is, but how so much fun it is, then I don't know what does. I give Fast 10 an 8 out of 10. Strictly speaking, it's not the most competent movie I've seen this year, but in terms of entertainment value, it's right up there. Some stuff works really, really well. Some stuff not so much, but overall, I had a great time, and I'm really glad I saw it. And yeah, bring on the next part when that comes out. I hope it's next year. I hope we don't have to wait 2 years. Give me more Jason Momoa. Dante Reyes, fantastic villain, the Joker of the Fast and Furious franchise. He absolutely makes this movie 100%. If nothing else, go and see it for a great performance from Jason Momoa. There, thank you very much for listening. I hope you've enjoyed. I will be back next week for a couple more episodes. As promised, I will be doing that delayed next step in the Christopher Nolan journey before we get to Oppenheimer. We'll be talking about The Prestige and also Insomnia. And then it's Disney live action remake time. We'll be reviewing The Little Mermaid. So be sure to stick around next week. Well, don't stick around. Be sure to tune in next week. Go somewhere else, live your life, have fun, and then come back next week. And please listen to those episodes. Please. That would really make me happy. Thank you, thank you. I love you all. Until next week, I love and appreciate you as always. You've been spliced in later. Adios, muchachos. I'll catch you next time.